Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton here with Brandon. Spring hath sprung. It's March. It is 64 degrees outside here in the Midwest. And this weekend in California, we had our very first Spring Fest event. Trios is back. It's my favorite format. I'm really excited for the spring season to finally get underway. Which also means it's time for our BSF All of the Decks preview. First, we'll lead off with the California regional results. A whole lot of Chainsaw Man, Brandon. There's a Chainsaw Man on every one of these teams, and they are all basically the same list. The Himeno Aki Stock Soul bar list. In first place, you had Chainsaw Man, Hendrickson, and Ichika from Quince. In second, you had another Hendrickson and Nino from Quince. Third place, Chainsaw Man, Caligura, and the Avatar Tafazula list. And in fourth, Slime, Stand By Murin, Hololive Caligura, and that Chainsaw Man. So obviously the thing to talk about here is Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man's in this really weird spot where, like, if 75% of the teams in California had a Chainsaw Man player, this is just what was gonna happen. I think it says more about just how much people are playing Chainsaw Man versus, like, how it did, because I just think it was on almost every one of these teams.
We've all seen this expectation of Chainsaw Man that's going to be good, and if you're going to do well, you would want to have this on your team. And I think that this is very much that representation to the nth degree, right? The fact that every top 8 team has Chainsaw Man on the list, I think is significant, but I think it's only significant if that continues to be the pattern going forward.
And we'll see how people respond to this specifically, I think. Because if Chainsaw Man's going to have this big of a cut of the meta, people are going to make decisions about what they play in response to it and try to play something that can take advantage of the fact that you're probably going to see Chainsaw Man twice. We have talked about Chainsaw Man as being a Swiss killer, something that will very consistently go X1, X2. In Springfest specifically, I think Chainsaw Man is particularly powerful because of its ability to contribute a win to the team in 4 or 5 of your 6 rounds with excellent consistency. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Chainsaw Man had the most tops in Springfest come the end of the season. I think this deck is particularly strong in a trios format. As for the rest of top 8, nothing unexpected here. We're going to get into talking about these decks when we talk about them in our deck by deck, all of the decks preview that's coming up here in just a second. But SDS Hendrickson and Quince both showing up in the top 2 teams, and a pair of Caliguras. Caligura is the Hololive list now, it seems. There is another Hololive. There's Oski Polka in top 8, but Caligura seems to be the Hololive list of choice as we get Springfest underway.
No, a very strong start for Springfest as it goes in California. 81 teams there, so quite a few in that competition field. Looking forward to see what that comes out this next weekend with London.
All right, let's get into it. So, all of the decks. We do this every year for spring and fall. We're not going to do every single deck that exists because that video would be 6 hours long, and nobody wants to be here for that long. So, Brandon and I have chosen sets, really, that are either already relevant or are brand new. We're going to talk about all of the new stuff that we haven't talked about in the context of a competitive meta yet. Those things are all going to be talked about. We're going to hone in on them and give them their own individual due. And then at the end, we're going to talk about, kind of in brief, a few more things that are worth looking at and paying attention to. Because Springfest is such a diverse meta, you're going to see 30 different sets get a top over the course of spring. That's just what's going to happen. Like, I'm pretty sure last year, I think this was last year, that all of the power-up sets, Kill a Kill, Haruhi, and Log Horizon, teamed up for a top at one of the smaller events. Like, you can see anything top at Springfest. It's the nature of the event. It's one of the things that makes it one of my favorite events. That being said, we're not going to talk about all of them. We're going to talk about the stuff that's a little bit more relevant, but we're going to try to at least make mention of some other things that are also relevant. With that said, let's get this underway and start by talking about Avatar. Avatar's already got a top, finished 3rd in California the first weekend. This is a list that showed up at Worlds as well. Finished 3rd at Worlds. Had a couple other players on it as well. Usually you're going to see the Toph Azula list, the level 1 bar, into the level 3 standby that uses the Sokka as a way to generate extra attacks. It feels like people have really started to solve Avatar in the last couple of months. It felt really janky when it first came out, and it wasn't really like getting its results, but it feels like people have really started to figure out how to maximize the value of the Sokka, maximize the value of these truly strange profiles, like the 2-1 that just becomes a copy of whatever trigger is on the board. It feels like this set is starting to figure itself out, and people are really starting to unlock it a bit, which is why it's been kind of rising up tier lists in the past few months.
Yeah, no, definitely being able to take advantage of the Sokka to be able to get those extra attacks off definitely increases that threat range, which is exactly what you're looking for in that kind of top end. And so the deck being able to be built around that and be able to essentially try to take advantage of that, control your level to be able to get to the point in the game to pull that off and kind of get to level 3 first and then close out the game. Yeah, it's exactly what you're looking for in a deck.
Chainsaw Man. It has one deck. It's Stock Soul Bard. This is the list that made 8 appearances in top 8 in California. It has a ton of resource generating pieces. It plays the level 0 power that when it attacks, you can just shove something else from your board into your stock. It's trying to loop the Stock Soul, which is on a spammable Brainstormer that checks 3 to add 1. So the combo itself, top checks 3, adds 2, and you try to spam the Brainstormer to get your Stock Soul back into your hand. The other key piece is the 2-1. It is a level 3 assist that if it has a certain level 0 under it as a marker, then you get to look it up to 3 and put them back at the beginning of both your clock and your attack phases, so you get to know exactly what you're triggering and also what you're drawing if you decide to clock. It also has, when you trigger a CX, you can ditch a CX to heal one. So if you have an extra bar that you hit off the trigger, you can immediately ditch it and heal an additional 1. This is a deck that wants to play its early play healers down. It plays the Aki healers. It basically always has its condition because it's based around the level 1 event that it's shoving into memory early in the game. So it's spamming these healers, healing whenever it triggers, trying to stabilize at 2 and keep the game at 2 as long as it can, before trying to close the game with its bar combo, which is essentially a 4-card Icy Tail, except it deals damage in instances of 1. So list is super consistent as long as you get the Stock Soul into hand. Like, if you get the Stock Soul into hand multiple turns, you're going to have your resources.
I think one of the big things this deck has going for it, especially, is the ability to create a big wall at 1, kind of trying to box out some of the decks that can't reach over that 10k threshold. Alongside that, being able to try to start getting advantage at 1, combined with the Stock Soul in the back row, so you can kind of combo and have that big wall. I definitely think we're seeing a lot of it. I agree, Swiss Killer.
Yeah, and I think that it also does have enough variance in its game plan. Like, if you are going up against something that really has no chance of clearing your 10k wall, you can lean into the Kishibe if you really want to. But against bigger meta threats, stuff that can clear the 10k wall, you go for something completely different. You just go to get your pieces that you need. I think that's your main game plan, with the Kishibe kind of being like a free, oversized striker if you happen to get copies of it in most games. But it also can just like wall up and beat over smaller things in the early rounds of Swiss. Guilty Gear came out over the winter, made a couple appearances at Worlds. The deck that people seem to be the most excited about is the Ram Lethal, that summons extra attackers to the board. It also plays events that try to summon extra attackers to the board. Kind of trying to do the Avatar thing, but not quite as efficiently, usually on the level 1 Kai, that is effectively just a Maguro. A lot of kind of wacky cards in this set. Sometimes you do see the May, the Pirates build, as well. This is a set that feels like it's literally just like it's less good Avatar. Like, it's still solid. Like, it's certainly quite good when it gets going. It definitely feels more fragile than Avatar, and not quite as figured out as Avatar. Do you think that there's the potential that with enough time, in the same way that Avatar kind of feels like it's being solved, that Guilty Gear kind of has that same potential where as it gets figured out, it's going to start to do better in this meta as well?
So I think that there's still some flexibility with the set because it's still relatively new, right? It only just came out 3 months ago. They're still kind of playing through some of the different kind of tournaments. This is its main first big tournament scene, right? It has a lot of potential room to grow in. I think we're going to see the Ram going to be the top end of choice. It's going to be the top end to do the most with. I think playing around with maybe potentially some of those events and getting additional restands in and being able to build up the resources to make that happen, I think is the way that we're going to see some kind of changes with that. And I think that's the only way that it's actually going to truly change in regards to beyond what it already is. But I think that the standby into the RAM allows that potential to bring that on as early as 2, which I think is significant here because it allows you the flexibility of when you want to close out the game.
Hololive, winner of worlds. There are still sharks in the water. Caligura finishing first and fourth, and then also getting a pair of tops in top 4 in the California regional. Deck's really good. Like, I mean, Gura's still obnoxiously powerful as a top end. There's no getting around that. So many consistency tools. Like, Hololive is just so full of cards. It just has pretty much every good profile in the game. So you can adapt your list to suit whatever meta you're walking into. There are also lots of other good lists in the set as well. There's a reason that people are still playing the Oski as kind of the engine for a bunch of standby heavy lists. And those standby lists can be power based, they can be board based, they can be damage based. You can do a lot of different things with Hololive. I don't know if there's a wrong way to play it, especially in a Springfest environment. Like, you just throw 2 good combos together into a Hololive deck, and the deck will just work. Caligura is definitely top of the pile right now, but there's always the possibility that Hololive has more tricks up its sleeve.
Yeah, and I think that realistically, it comes down to it has the explosive top end, it has the tools, it has the resources, it has the card pool to be able to do what it wants to do. So I think as long as you're sculpting the deck to do what you want it to do, I think it has that kind of capability and it has the tools and resources to make it happen. So having those tools and resources available to you on top of an explosive finisher as well as good profiles throughout the levels at this point. Like at this point you have good profiles at every level of the game. Like this is like the consistent of consistency with whatever you want to make and do.
Moving on to Licorice Recoil, another new set that is about to drop. This set is fine. I don't think it's going to make massive headway in this meta, but it's definitely playable. The most interesting part to me is the Chisato and Takina top end, where you use the 2 of them to generate restands and also try to create burn ones. It feels very Review Starlight, just kind of like upgraded Review Starlight. So set's fine. Like, you have a level 1 combo that like gets, decent generic plussing, because it's a cigarettes that also fixes your trigger. So a lot of like good cards in Licorice Recoil, not a lot of great ones, nothing that really blows the doors off. And I think that's ultimately what's going to keep it from being super relevant. But again, in Springfest Swiss, this set absolutely can go X2 and be a contributor on a top 8 team, and I think it probably will at least a couple times during the spring season. But the ceiling on this set, I don't think it's super high. Also, keep an eye on like a true hexproof Negsol that comes down at a fair cost. It's expensive, but like if you let that Negsol player have the resources and time to get that Negsol down, you just don't get to do any damage the rest of the game. So like be mindful that that exists, because that will ruin somebody's day this spring. Don't let it be you, because that's actually like not a terrible deck.
I think the set is relatively mediocre only because it doesn't have a lot of the tools that you would want it to have. Like it doesn't have there's nothing exceedingly broken about it, and I think that that's going to be the difference maker between seeing this in top tiers and seeing it in just the middling of the pack. Is that most of these decks beyond or in the top tiers have specific cards that help set them apart and help keep them for the reasons why you would choose the decks. This deck pool, or this pool of cards, doesn't have that kind of card. It doesn't have the broken card that says way above and beyond everything else that currently exists. So I think we'll see some of this, but I don't think we'll see this consistently in the top techs.
Moving on to Overlord. This set is such an enigma. People were really excited about it when it dropped. Thought it was going to be really good. A lot of people were really concerned that it was going to just warp the meta around itself. It didn't do that. Like, straight up, it just did not do that. It did not have a very good representation to top ratio. It did not have a massive number of tops. The Eins, which was feared to be the boogeyman of the meta, it comes down early. You do the stuff with the markers to burn 5 times, and it's non-interactive. You can't remove the Eins from the board once it's down, as long as it has the back row. Like, the only way to deal with this Eins is to present an early play counter when it swings at you, when it's still at 2. Like, it felt really, like, it just because it was so non-interactive, it felt really powerful. And it just, like, did not happen. I think that some of that has to do with this is a difficult deck to play well. If you picked this up thinking that it was going to carry you as a player to tops, you were sorely mistaken. The skill test with this deck is extremely high. You have to pilot it well for it to actually do what it's supposed to do. There's a lot of complexity in its gameplay, but at the same time, like, it just didn't do as well. I think there's still a lot of potential here. Like, I think when it does go off, like, we've all seen it go off. When it does go off, it's really impressive, but it's more fragile than I think a lot of people give it credit for. A lot of really good players are still on this saying it's going to be good and it's going to be relevant. Maybe Spring gives it that shot in the arm. Maybe, like, the fact that it doesn't need to be counted on to go 5-1-6-0 in order to, get tops. And maybe it can, get that assist from teammates to help kind of push it into top 8. But, like, Brandon, you've been off this. Like, basically since it dropped, you were like, I don't think this is all that good. And you've kind of been at least somewhat vindicated, because Overlord has not been the dominant force that many people thought it was going to be. Like, does Overlord have it within itself to figure itself out starting in the spring? Like, what's next for this deck?
I think it's still going to run into some of the same issues that it was running into before. I think slime is still going to be prevalent enough to make it to cause concerns for some of that thing, right? So its big removal of board doesn't actually happen, which then becomes a little bit more of an issue when it can't actually clear the board that it's trying to remove. With that in mind, I think that we're going to see some of those other decks as well take advantage of Overlord's abilities early in the game, especially because we have a very damage heavy meta right now. Being able to push damage into Overlord is kind of crucial here, and I think there's enough decks that can do that efficiently and effectively that you're not going to see this as much. Can it do well? Yes. Can it pop off? Absolutely. Can it do crazy things? Sure, absolutely it can. Are we going to see it? I don't think we're going to see this as much. Do you need to still tech your decks out for it? Yeah. Do you still need to actually be prepared to play into it? Absolutely. Do I think we're going to see it? Probably not.
Moving on to Quince. How the Mighty Have Fallen. It was the best deck in the meta for a very considerable period of time. Did not top at Worlds. I believe it went 0-6 on stream at Worlds, much to the joy of some. There are 3 different decks in Quince, all of which are still relevant. You have the 8 standby, the 8 choice, and 8 salvage lists, which I'm going to refer to by their triggers because they all look the same and I can't be bothered to learn their names. 8 salvage will usually run 3 different combos. It just pluses off of those combos all game long until it gets to a level 3 that is pay 1, pitch 1, burn 3. So just like solid damage on a solid standby engine, you're gonna trigger standby enough in an 8 standby list that you're gonna get the value that you want, because standby triggers are still extremely powerful. The 8 choice list sometimes runs 3 combos, sometimes runs 2 combos. Most importantly, at the top, on cancel, shuffle back X and burn X equal to the number of other Quince characters you have. So you can essentially, if your damage cancels, get another chance with more of a chance of actually sticking the damage. So that deck has really been climbing up the ranks. There are a lot of people who think that that is the best deck in Quince right now, and I don't necessarily think that they're wrong. And then you have the OG 8 salvage list, which people were very worried about coming into English. I know I was very worried about it coming in English. I still don't like to sit across from it because it is just an insane value engine, still one of the best value engines in English, where you spam the Brainstormer and the other pieces that allow you to hold a hand size of 9, and your combo potentially goes +2 because you're ditching one, looking at 3, adding all the characters. So you're gonna have this massive hand, and then when you get to the very end, you are pitching 3 to burn 3 and then Mocha 2 before your actual attack. Very powerful top end, extremely good value engine, just very, very good text on these cards. However, none of them did super well at Worlds, with the exception of an 8 standby list that went X2. Quince did not have a good Worlds, and I think a lot of people are really starting to maybe come off it. Do you think that it can have a good Springfest, Brandon, given that it does have a diversity of different things it can do, and it still did well in the BCS season, but at the top tables at Worlds, it really didn't show up?
In Cali, we saw 2 Quints in the top 2, so I think we're still going to see it. We saw the choice list end up in the top team, and then 12 standby list in the second place team. So we definitely are still going to be seeing Quince. Quince is still pretty relevant, especially as it's going to likely eventually get more support here. But I don't think Quince is something that we can say is gone away. I think we're still going to see quite a bit of it here in Springfest. I think this might be people's third deck brought into teams, so I think we're still going to see quite a bit of it yet.
Moving on to Seven Deadly Sins. Escanor is dead, long live Hendrickson. Hendrickson is the dude now. He is the face of the Seven Deadly Sins list. He is pay 1, pitch 2. Look at the top card of your opponent's deck. You can leave it or mill it, and then burn 4. It's a damage push top end that it doesn't push it in multiple increments, it just throws it all at you at once. It also does have decompression tools. It's playing pretty much exclusively now the Stock Soul combo in the back row on the Elizabeth Brainstormer that allows you to mill and then salvage something based on the level of what you milled, so like a half cigarettes, and you've got these really good zeros that you feel good about getting back into your hand, multiple different Brainstormers that you're going to see. It's very similar to the Chainsaw Man list. It's just not quite as tuned. It doesn't have as many pieces, but definitely has recovered from the Escanor ban and is still quite relevant.
So I think it's one of the things that really benefits off of is having that level 0 combo that you can spam as early as 0 and continue to spam it over and over again. Especially with Henderson being on pants, you're being able to recur that more often, so you can potentially benefit off of those resources more. Playing into Henderson allows you that bigger reach, so even if you do fall behind in games, you still have that comeback opportunity here to be able to close out games that might have slipped a little bit beyond your control. I do think it's a little bit weaker still in the mid game, but I think that your resource generation early and your bigger reach in the end game make up for it to be able to make this a pretty decent closer in that kind of mid tier status.
Another new set, Spy Family, just came out. A lot of different ways you can play Spy Family, the most popular of which seems to be Pants Choice. The Pants combo is a top check 3 that adds 1 and puts the other 2 back on top in any order, and then it turns into a different Fiona on your opponent's turn that when they attack into it, at the end of the attack, you get to look at up to 3 and rearrange them. So you can fix for cancels, you could potentially fix your next draw. It is a very solid mid game. I think that is pretty well established to be the best way to play the mid game in a competitive environment with Spy Family. The top end is usually the Anya, which is a Mocha 3 that heals with its combo. So pay 1, pitch 1, Mocha 3, and heal 1. It comes down early with an event package. The idea is that you are using this kind of defensive top deck fix and offensive top deck fix with your combo to lengthen out the game so that you can close with your Mochas. It's not an easy deck to pilot. I've been trying to make it work, and I'm going to be honest, I don't love the way the choice top end feels still. Like, Mocha just never feels like it gets there. But it reads pretty strong, and there are definitely a lot of people who like it. So I think we're going to see it at Springfest for sure. It'll be around, and I think it'll get its fair share of tops. There are also a lot of other ways to play it. Like the Your top end is just pay 1, burn 4. The Lloyd top end is pay 2, burn 3, and then if that 3 cancels, burn 1. There are also the bar combos at 0 and 2 that I think are going to show up in some lists. Just as plussing combos if you don't want to play into the more the defensive package with the Fiona. A lot of different ways you can play Spy Family. All of them decent. None of them feel super, super powerful.
So looking at Spy Family, I think a lot of that kind of idea, especially early, like you mentioned with the Fiona, comes from the idea we saw with Dal. We saw that kind of being able to rearrange your own deck state on your opponent's turn to be very strong, and being a very strong ability to help get extra cancels and to be able to effectively slow the damage race early, so that way you can kind of control the game state from that kind of standpoint. And I think that that's a really big key factor into playing with Spy Family, is if you can get those extra cancels early, you can survive just that little bit longer, which is just enough to close out the game. Whether you're using the Anya or whether you actually are using the Lloyd at the top of the Pants ability to be able to just get additional burns and then on a cancel potential burn again. So like being able to get additional damage in at that point at the top, I think is actually a pretty big key here. And I think that when you combine some of the unique profiles that set has to bring, I think it can do really well. It's just going to be a matter of your deck state and being able to control your deck state, and the control that you have over that, I think, is going to be very huge going forward.
And then finally, last deck that we're going to talk about in detail, Slime. Slime was one of the most consistent decks over the course of last season's meta. With the ban of the level 1 combo, the level 1 Shizu combo, people really did pivot into the standby. Not even so much for the standby combo, but just because like the standby trigger was really nice. It just helped you set up your Murin board because you have, all these level 2s that you want to get on the board. So the ability to just slam a standby, trigger a standby to get those things down, in addition to the potential to, get additional triggers off the combo itself, just made it work. And we saw a lot of Slime in top 8 at Worlds. We saw 3 standby Murin lists at Worlds, and we saw 5 different Slime lists in top 8 in California. Like, a lot of Slime. We did see one list that did not run the Murin and was instead just an 8 standby build. I don't know if there's a set that pays out its standby triggers as well, that pays off its standby triggers, I should say, as well as Slime does, just because of what you are able to do with the stuff that you bring in. It's just a good deck. Like, it still runs really consistently. The Murin is an elite plussing package. It sits on the board really big, and you get it cheap because of the package you run and now the standby trigger. It's just good stuff, and it just works.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually one of the big key pieces here, is that you have those tools necessary to be able to do things with it. Being able to get that back row support that can grant hexproof to your board as early as 1 now with the standby trigger, it was always huge. It was always a big thing, right? Being able to bring that in early was significant. However, it was just how much could you use it to benefit off of it, and being able to then bring in the Murins through either additional standbys when you're triggering at level 1, or to bring in other pieces as well. Like, you have those tools, you have those resources. Hexproof, along with big boards, make Slime worth playing still.
So those decks are the ones that we wanted to specifically highlight, either because they are at the top of the current meta or they are coming into the game, and we wanted to talk about them with at least some level of detail. Now it's time for the lightning round. We've got a handful of other decks that are at least worth noting going into Springfest, because again, this is a team format. You're not just going to see the top stuff. You're going to see all kinds of stuff. People will play more casually. People will play their, not top tier stuff at these events. They're more likely to bring stuff that they consider to be fun because the stakes are a little bit lower and they have teammates. So, going through this list, Adventure Time. Got a top at Worlds. Like, there's no getting around that. Adventure Time got a top at Worlds. It deserves its flowers. It deserves to be talked about. It does two things that really, really matter. One is the Finn and Jake top end that burns, and the other is the Demon Bloodsword event that yeets standby targets and other big things off the board into your opponent's hand. It opens up lanes for damage, forces your opponent to play those back to the board from hand. Those two things make Adventure Time noteworthy.
Yeah, I think the Demon Bloodsword is actually like the main reason why you would try to run it, because you can effectively deal with two lanes at once, and that's usually enough to mess with people. I think that is a card that is worth checking in because you have immediate access onto your opponent's field.
Arthureta, it's 2-soul time. Stupid plussing off of the level 1 2-soul combo, like, actually a ridiculous card. It does open up its own lanes, so it can eat damage right back, but the damage push in Arthureta is actually ridiculous. Top end is a little underwhelming, but it generates so many resources and pushes so much damage early that it might actually still work out for you. List is pretty decent.
Yeah, the deck has a lot it can do. I think that you're going to run into issues if the game is sped up too quickly, and I think that's something you're going to run into, especially in this current meta, as damage push is very significant. And I think you're going to run into, if you eat enough damage early quickly, that you're not going to be able to be as explosive at the top, which means you're not going to be able to close them out either. So,
Azure Lane. The deck is 16 cards. You play 4 copies of one cat, you play 4 copies of the other cat, 4 copies of the bar combo, and 4 copies of the bar CX. And that's it. This deck is toxic and stupid. It's a coin flip. Like, if you want to go to Springfest and flip a coin every round and see if you win or lose, then play Azure Lane. The deck is dumb. I don't like it. It needs to be banned because it's not good gameplay. It doesn't encourage good gameplay. It's bad game design. It's just bad. It's not Weiss. We're not playing Weiss when we play Azure Lane. It's just going to sit there and try to recur cats, recur its bar, maybe recur its, level 1 that it pays 1 to summon things. What it has at level 3 doesn't matter, because whether or not it wins is determined by if it sticks a bunch of damage when it slams its bar with the cats on the board on turn 2.
So it has a lot of fixing early, especially to be able to go back and forth to get those level zeros on board that can get rather large. It allows you to win board at 0 and allows you to be able to push soul damage quickly. Those zeros, like Colton said, can help carry the game forward, allowing you to be able to benefit off of pushing all that damage early into ideally your opponent's least compressed state, being that early deck that they're unable to effectively control their own deck state in until they get into that next deck. That being said, that's like as Colt kind of mentioned, that is kind of the core gameplay for some of that thing. Everything else is kind of incidental based off around it, so it's playing into a myriad of top ends. But the most thing to be concerned about is that early game level zeros.
Bang Dream, getting some more support. When you sit across from Bang Dream, you have no idea what you're going to be sitting across from. Nanami Chutu got a top in California, and that's just indicative of what this set is. It's a million different cards. It does a million different things. It's honestly pretty cool. Nothing is super, super powerful in it anymore, I don't think. It does have the 2-1 stock swap event, which is really good. You just kind of have to read the cards, or you just have to have intimate knowledge of all 20 relevant Bang Dream combos. It's a diverse set, and you have to pay attention to what goes into your opponent's grave when you play into it. Otherwise, knock yourself out. It's super fun. Build something with it.
Yeah, I think Bang Dream has a pretty diverse card pool that allows it to be able to do some very flexible things. It is getting some more support later this year, but that support, most of it is, again, kind of either reprints of different kind of profiles that have been important in the past, or just more flexibility for some of the different kind of type of band-specific things. So I don't think that we're going to see a lot of additional boost off of the kind of Countdown collection that's coming out, or the trial deck that's coming out with that later this year. But I think that we might still see some of this, as it has those tools, it has some of those resources, especially to be able to do things for relatively cheap costs. So it's able to benefit off of its own game plan very effectively. So it's just a matter of, is the top end going to be enough? The most relevant top end has been the anti-burn top end with the next soul potential that allows you the ability to effectively try to stop the game at 3. However, those things only really become online at 3, so it becomes difficult to play those things into some of the more explosive top ends that we see that can kind of play around some of those things.
Dragon Maid. It does three things well. One, it pushes damage pretty consistently because it wants to slam a bar every turn. Two, it has excellent fixing. And it gets to play a whole bunch of answers to all kinds of different things. It actually matches up pretty well into Slime for that reason, because you just have a whole bunch of tools that can actually deal with level 2s directly. And you have the fixing to do it because you have a ton of support for the bars. It's very techy, and in certain matchups right now, it doesn't matter as much. Like against things like Quince and Chainsaw Man, that doesn't matter as much as if you're playing against something like SDS or Slime, where the tech that you have, or Bang Dream, where the tech that you have actually really does affect how you can interact with your opponent. And the third thing is Ilalu. Ilalu's ridiculous. 144, 144, 144 will win the vast majority of games, even from deep in level 2. So Ilalu always gives you a chance.
Yep, I'll leave it to the Dragon Maid expert.
MTI, two really relevant things, I think. You're usually going to see the 8 standby list, although sometimes you'll see bar standby. Non-interactive top end that can't be tapped or neg soul countered. So be aware of that. Like your defensive counters will oftentimes not do anything against MTI's top end. And it has its tap counter back. So it can tap counter you now that it is off the ban list. Don't think it's going to be great. You probably won't see a ton of it, but if you do see it, know that it has its tap counter back, and you can't really interact with its top end.
I think the tap counter actually is probably the most significant thing with this deck at this point, because I think that as much as like there are a lot of decks at this top end of the decks that don't allow tap counter to actually like come into play, having tap counter I think is actually a pretty significant detriment to a lot of top ends, that it can allow MTI that additional turn it may need to close out a game.
Yeah, and it also does, like, if you have it, you force your opponent to play around it. So even if you don't have it in your hand, even if you just have it in your deck and they don't know where it is, you force your opponent to have to play around the fact that you could potentially tap them down. So that alone is worth paying attention to in the MTI matchup. Saikano. This is mostly here because if you run into Killua, he might beat you with it. It's also getting a little bit of support with another set. It doesn't really change, I don't think, much of what the set is trying to do. It's still mostly memory compression. It doesn't have a really good top end. A really good player on it can sometimes get there, but the deck is just not. It doesn't have the tools for a modern game.
It's slow. That's the problem. Is it takes too long for those effects to come online. I think the effects that it have are actually relatively strong because effectively you can turn it into pay 1 heals, which are actually like pretty good. But the pay 1 heals don't really come online until effectively level 3, and by that point it's usually a little too late. Your deck compression is the big thing that tried to help keep those cancels in place, but if you don't have the time to build up the memory to have that kind of compression, you're not going to have it. So I think with the damage meta being what it is right now, Saikano is just a little too slow and is not enough to be able to stand up to some of the things that are currently in the meta.
And then finally, Tokyo Revengers. It does two things. It plays dual laners, and it plays Pachin. Pachin comes in, and it sits at 16k, and you basically can't kill it. Dual laners gets you a whole bunch of stock and a whole bunch of resources. The ultimate goal of the deck is to try to pop off with one of these extremely powerful level 3 combos that does a whole bunch of burns and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's a little wonky. I think similarly to Saikano, the meta is like one turn too fast for this now. Because you can just get rushed, especially by Arthureta, by Azure Lane, by Hololive, things that just slam CXs on the board and have a bunch of soul triggers. It's a little bit too easy for TRV to just get rushed, and also it dies pretty hard to stock swap if you hit it at the right time. So it's still relevant. You still need to pay attention to it, but this meta is not particularly kind to Tokyo Revengers, I don't think, other than maybe like the very best Tokyo Revengers players who are playing into matchups and know how to deal with those matchups.
So there's not been much TRV around, in part just because it also, as much as it plays into some of those early game pieces to build up the resources for the end game, the end game requires so many resources to be able to be relevant, and it has to be kind of piloted, kind of like Overlord, very specifically in order to be able to do things correctly and get the most out of it. It has the board. You can definitely develop the board with it. You just aren't able to take advantage of the board with it as much as things like Slime and Alice used to, because they were able to effectively combo and have board. This, you have to pick between kind of comboing or board, right? Because if you're going to go the dual laners route, you can get the resources, but if you go the Pachin route, you have the full board and win board. You have to kind of choose between the two.
So a few days ago, I was on PGH Weiss Schwarz's channel for their 2024 tier list. It was me, Carmen, Ollie, Tyler, Weiss Schwarz, and Kilua, Kevin. We talked about card games for like 2.5 hours. We're going to put a link in the description to that conversation. This was the tier list that the 5 of us ended up on after a very long conversation. And this is about where I'm at. Like, I was obviously part of building this tier list. This is about where I'm at as far as the meta is concerned. I think I would bump Overlord to the back of A and probably Spy Family down to the top of B. Those are probably really the only real changes I would make to this and aren't like splitting hairs. Like, this is about where things lie. This is for all of 2024, so things like Shauna are on here, which won't be out for Springfest. So be aware of that. 2 questions for you, Brandon. Question number 1: is there anything at the top of this tier list, or I mean anything that's further down that you think should be higher up, that you would change? Like, is there anything that you see that you go, I would move that to a different tier?
No, I think it's relatively about right. I think it's relatively about the right spot.
Question 2: on tiers C, D, and F, if you had to choose one thing to take to Springfest for the purposes of winning, and you had to choose something from C, D, and F, what are you choosing from each of those 3 tiers?
For tier C, I'm taking Licorice Recoil. From tier D, I would be taking... actually be taking Fate. And then from tier F, I would be figuring out what Haruhi looks like.
We got him, guys. Finally, we got him. Yeah, for me, I think it's pretty similar. I think for C, it would be Adventure Time for me, because like the Demon Blood Sword is really good, and I think the top end is really good, and you just hope that you dodge the slime matchup as much as you can. On D tier, I think for me it would be Konosuba, just because you do have like Stock Swap Fumio Burn 5, and that still like is never going to be completely inviable. The Darkness package is still pretty decent. It still works pretty well. So I think that you can use the Darkness to get into that top end and, give yourself a shot at a Burn 5, a decompressed Burn 5. And if you hit with it, like, congratulations, you got your win. Can you go 4-2 with Konosuba at Springfest? Absolutely you can. And on F tier, like, yeah, it's got to be Haruhi. It has 2 cards that just shut off opposing climax combos. The rest of the deck isn't very good, but it does just enough so that you can just get there. Like, I'm not saying that we're going to do super well, but if I had to play something on F tier, I'd absolutely be bringing Haruhi. Fun deck to play. Is it good? Not really. But is it fun? Absolutely. So much fun. All right, but that is it for us. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back on Thursday with, I believe, 5 cards, 5 minutes. And then next week, a deck and some gameplay, back to our regular schedule now that we're back into the flow of Springfest, getting ready for tournaments, and watching the results as they come in. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.